program will begin in 5 minutes. Please find your way into the auditorium and take your seats. Please take a moment to silence your mobile phones and devices. Take your seats. The program will begin momentarily. Please welcome to the stage comedian Cristela Alonzo.
Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing today? Oh, a little bit more excitement. Thank you. It's like, I see you. I know you're here. Please let me know. My name's Cristela Alonzo. I'm very excited to be here because it was my choice to be here. And, they're taking away our choices, so I got to celebrate any time I can make a choice about my body. You know what I mean? I was at a drive-thru yesterday. I'm like, I'll have a number one with a Sprite. My body, my choice. Gotta do that. I'm actually first-generation Mexican-American. My parents came here so that I could have choices that they couldn't have. My mom grew up in a village in the middle of nowhere, no running water, no electricity. And my dad and my mom met the old-fashioned way. He kidnapped her. That's how they met in the village. It was like, oh, you've been taken? It's true love. So when my mom discovered that in the United States you could date, she wanted to bring her children here so that they could have that choice. Now we realize that there's choices being made and the future's about making progress. And for me, I got to tell you, I never thought I'd be in DC. I grew up in a border town. My first language is Spanish. Now as an adult, I speak 3 languages. I speak Spanish, English, and Caucasian. Caucasian is like English, but I have to use fancy words I don't normally use, like organic and deductible. Let me give you an example. Like in my everyday life, when my friends mess up, I'm like, girl, you messed up. But in Caucasian, I'm like, ma'am, that is inappropriate. See? I will screw you up. Let me speak to the manager. See? It's right there. I grew up in a mixed status family. If you guys don't know what that means that half of us were documented, half of us were undocumented, and we're not telling you which one's which. We all look alike, We grew up very poor. We had to share a bathroom and a birth certificate. It was awful. My brother Cristela hated it, but that's okay. Now, I grew up in a bubble. I grew up in a border town right next to Mexico, and a lot of people don't understand that when you grow up in a bubble, you don't realize that diversity exists. We grew up in neighborhoods. I grew up in an all-Mexican neighborhood. We didn't have diversity at all. We were all Mexican. We didn't have, white people, black people, Asian. So growing up, I thought everybody in the world was Mexican. Then I went to college in St. Louis, Missouri. No one warned me. And the thing is that, I always say that when you leave your neighborhood, it's up to you to discover the world that's out there. When I went to college in St. Louis, I met all kinds of people. I hadn't met white people. I didn't know that there was a difference in white people. There, in the tones of white people. There's white people and white, you know what I mean? Like white. And I'm like, are you haunting me? You know what I mean? Do you go here or do you have a message from my dead mother? You know what I mean? But I didn't realize that I was going to meet other people that grew up in bubbles too, right? So my freshman year, my roommate, she was from Tennessee. She had never met a Latina before in her life. So her mom was there to drop her off. Her mom wasn't sure if I spoke English. We had been talking all day. So I don't know what she thought, maybe halfway through the day, it's like, hey, how are you? I'm doing pretty good. Are you sure? No, yeah, no. You know what I mean? But, it's that thing about diversity and the thing about seeing everybody in this audience. It's just, we're all here for a common interest. We are day 1 of the Atlantic Festival. And I got to tell you, it's just so great to be here with everybody. Like I said, I'm first generation. I grew up in McAllen, Texas. Obviously, some of you might recognize McAllen because we've been in the news for the past couple of years. And the thing is that my family came here to this country so that we could have a shot and that we could have access to things that I never knew existed, like healthcare. And it's this thing where today I stand here in front of you to welcome you all because I'm such a fan of the Atlantic and just everything that they do and what they represent. I've seen so many of them on the news, even though I've got a better room rater wall. that, I'm a Hall of Famer, add plants. But, it's this thing where I just want to take a moment to welcome you all. Are you all ready to have a good time? Are you all ready to learn? Are you all ready to let's enjoy it. Please welcome, thank you for coming to the first day of the Atlantic Festival. My name's been Cristela Alonzo. Thank you so much.
Please welcome to the stage the Atlantic's Candace Montgomery.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Atlantic Festival's Idea Stage. I'm Candace Montgomery, Senior Vice President and General Manager of Atlantic Live. We are the team that brings the Atlantic journalism to life virtually and across stages all over the country. Let's give one more round of applause for comedian Cristela Alonzo. What a way to kick off our show. We are thrilled to bring the 2022 Atlantic Festival to life in person here at our new home, the Historic Wharf, and to our virtual audience tuning in worldwide. The Atlantic was founded 165 years ago to, among other things, illuminate the American idea, and this festival is the live expression of the Atlantic's mission. Across the next 3 days, our journalists will unpack the most consequential issues of our time with bold thinkers, innovators, policymakers, leaders in business and tech, advocates, and artists. We hope that you will leave feeling challenged and inspired. Before we get started, we want to thank our underwriters who support the Atlantic's journalism and the festival. Our underwriters are presenting level, Boston Consulting Group, CTIA, Pfizer, Southern Company, and the Walton Family Foundation. Our supporting level underwriter is KPMG, and our contributing level underwriters are Allstate, Edward Jones, Genentech, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, Amidyar Network, and Penguin Random House. Thank you all. A few practical notes before we get started. Please silence your cell phones, but don't put them away. We want you all to be in the conversation on social. When using social, please use hashtag TAF22. Now, let's enjoy the show.
For a conversation exploring the curriculum culture wars, please welcome to the stage Kimberlé Crenshaw, co-founder and executive director of the African American Policy Forum, and Randall Kennedy, a Michael R. Klein professor at Harvard Law School. Here to lead the conversation is Atlantic staff writer Adam Harris.
Hello, everyone. I am honored to be joined by legal scholar Kimberlé Crenshaw, co-founder and executive director of the African American Policy Forum and faculty director of the Center for Intersectionality and Social Policy Studies at Columbia Law School. Professor Crenshaw is a pioneering scholar and writer on civil rights, critical race theory, black feminist legal theory, and race, racism, and the law. In addition to her position at Columbia, she's a distinguished professor of law at the University of California, Los Angeles. Professor Crenshaw is known for the introduction and development of intersectional theory and intersectional feminism, and she has authored a number of books on the topic. Also joining us today is Randall Kennedy, a Michael R. Klein Professor of Law at Harvard University. His research focuses on the intersection of racial conflict and legal institutions in American life. He specializes in contracts, freedom of expression, race relations law, civil rights legislation, and the Supreme Court. Professor Kennedy's next book, Say It Loud, on Race, Law, History, and Culture, is a collection of provocative essays exploring the key social justice issues of our time. Professors Crenshaw and Kennedy, thank you so much for joining us today. So what we've seen over the last couple of years has been a sort of redefinition of critical race theory. But I think that definitions are incredibly important. So Professor Crenshaw, I'm going to go to you first. Can you define for us what critical race theory was and what it has become?
Thank you so much for asking it that way, right? Because it has gone through a redefinition. I would even say a theft of the concept. Critical race theory, properly framed, is a prism. It is a practice. It is a way of interrogating and understanding how and why 60 years after the civil rights movement, we still have predictable inequalities. We still have wealth gaps and health gaps and differences in encounters with police and differences in our encounters in the education system. So critical race theory has been and was a study of the way that law contributes to inequality. So rather than seeing law as a neutral referee, from a critical perspective, we looked at how law actually helped create what we think race is and help imbue that with material consequences. So race is a fiction, racism is real. Critical race theory studied how law contributed to both of those things.
Mm-hmm. And considering how it has been redefined now, where do you see the sort of current definition of critical race theory in the popular conception?
Well, it's not a secret that those who are attacking critical race theory do so fully aware that what they are trying to do is to recode critical race theory as the thing that makes people feel insecure. It is a container for grievance, many times grievance about loss of dominance, about loss of comfort. Critical race theory has been framed as effectively an assault, an attack on individuals, on children, rather than a study of history, a study of policies and practices, rather than a way of understanding why we have to address our racial history in order to claim a racial future. So for the most part, I would say that one can look directly at what some of the organizations and foundations coming after critical race theory say they're trying to do. They say they're trying to sow dissension and dissatisfaction with public schools as a way of attacking public education. There's no secret about what they're after. The real question is why it has been successful. And I would say one of the reasons it's successful is that there is discomfort talking about race. There's a convergence between people who want to use color blindness to take us back to the past and those who use color blindness as a way of circumventing the past in our hopes for the future.
And so, Professor Kennedy, you've been a critic of critical race theory in the past. What do you make of the current conversation around the curriculum, around kind of the way that people are seeing the world?
Well, as my colleague just put it, critical race theory, I put it in quotation marks, has become a boogeyman. And it's a way for people to attack what they perceive to be progressive beliefs with respect to the race question. And we've seen this before. I mean, this is not unprecedented. In the 1950s and 1960s, Bayard Rustin and Martin Luther King Jr. and the people who were propelling the Second Reconstruction were called what? They were called communists. And they were attacked. And they were attacked in very similar ways to the way in which critical race theory is being attacked now. So, there's when critical race theory is mentioned, it seems to me people ought to put a quotation marks around it. It is it is made to be something unattractive. It's made to be something stupid. The whole point of it is to gather momentum against anything that is viewed as racially progressive. And that's what it seems to me is going on here.
And of course, there are really practical stakes to this at this point, like really kind of on the ground stakes. In Texas, of course, which has an anti, quote unquote CRT law, educators have reported being confused about what is and off limits to teach, in part because the laws are written in such a way that is so vague. What are the sort of democratic risks? Are there democratic risks to this sort of boogeyman that has been created around critical race theory?
Well, of course. I mean, there really is no daylight between the attack on democracy and the attack on anti-racism. Ours is a country that had to fight hard and long. It's an incomplete fight to make us a real functioning multiracial democracy. The way that we have to grapple with our past to do that is exactly what those who are attacking critical race theory and attacking democracy want. I mean, it is not an accident that the same people who are perpetuating the big lie are the same people who are creating this manufactured moral panic around anti-racism and education. They're the same people who framed the George Floyd days of reckoning as, civil disruption to the point of bringing our democracy to the brink. Now, of course, what really brought our democracy to the brink was the assault on the Capitol, an assault that was carried out under a Confederate flag, along with a set of ideas that this country was being stolen from us. That was not a colorblind framing. That was not a colorblind mobilization, and it wasn't an unprecedented one, as much as people say this is not who we are. Saying that proves what the problem is, because that is who we've been. We are a country that struggled with democracy. We are a country that had coups in the past. We are a country that never really reckoned with what brought us to the brink before. So the connection between anti-democratic forces and white supremacist forces are deeply interwoven historically and now. The problem is, if we don't have a lens to see it, if we don't have comfort in talking about it, if we can't really do the reporting that's necessary to understand it, the saying was the past is not even the past. That rings true in this particular moment. So there are high stakes at being able to connect the dots and fight both of these things, understanding both of these things simultaneously.
Absolutely. And I have a follow-up to that. Professor Kennedy, I want to ask you the same question. What are the sort of democratic stakes to this kind of current conversation?
Huge stakes, and that's why everyone should be deeply concerned. Whatever one's views are of critical race theory without the quotation marks. I mean, there are people who, there are debates, there are reasonable debates that go on with respect to various tenets of critical race theory. But everybody should be concerned about the effort to censor, to outlaw critical race theory. And, democracy. An integral part of democracy, any decent democracy should have built into it a protection for thinking, protection for writing, protection for teaching, protection for listening. That is part of democracy. And when those things are attacked, as they are under attack now, in lots of different ways. You mentioned laws, and obviously laws are important, but it's far deeper than that. If you know that you're going to be under attack from your principal, if you know that in various ways your career is going to be undermined, if you know that if you say certain things, your very livelihood is going to be put into jeopardy, that's going to chill people. And we can see chilling happening all across the United States And again, I would say that everyone, wherever your ideological position, should be concerned about that, because ultimately, if critical race theory can be outlawed and can be ousted from the public realm, well, other ideas can be attacked in that way as well. So everyone should be concerned about this.
Absolutely. And you've both talked about how it's not necessarily unprecedented, right? That we have historical sort of analogs for kind of what is going on at this moment. But there's this notion, right, that discussions of racism and structural racism are in effect anti-white because they challenge sort of mythology of American exceptionalism, right? And Professor Crenshaw, I want to ask, what do you make of that idea? Can you sort of expand on that idea?
Well, I see in it a brilliant effort to use the frame of reverse discrimination and now apply it to education and to ideas. What a lot of people don't know, there's legislation that tries to restrict or limit education about race and racism in almost half the states. Mm-hmm. And for the most part, that legislation bans divisive concepts, right? Now, when you live in a society that has at its foundation enslavement, appropriation of land, colonization of black women's wombs as the production of the primary property that allowed us to expand, dealing with that foundational dimension of American society is inherently a divisive set of conversations, but it doesn't make it an illegitimate set of conversations. That's what's different about a democracy. You understand your way through engagement, through lifting up that which people may feel uncomfortable about, but yet that is what's required and that's what's responsible. So when I hear the framing of it as being anti-white, as Randy said, it just takes me back to many other moments in history where racial progress was framed as anti-white. Let us never forget that the freedom riders and the young people who sat in the lunch counters, they were called divisive. What they were calling for was called discrimination against people who owned businesses. They said to a point, being forced to serve you violates my civil rights. Being forced to allow my kids to go to school with your kids violates my rights of disassociation. So throughout our history, there's always been the capacity to make the argument that forward momentum, progression in terms of racial integration, racial progress, violates pre-existing rights. The question is to interrogate, as Charles Black said, do you have those rights in the first place? Do you have the right to exclude? Do you have a right to an education that doesn't deal with the reality that our country is based on? That's what the debate is, and what this is an attempt to do is make it impossible and unspeakable to even talk about these things.
You know, again, if we look at our history, we see that there have been massive attacks on racist attacks on freedom of expression. We can go back to the slavery period. In fact, the most comprehensive attack on intellectual freedom was in the slavery era, with laws that prohibited slaves from being taught to read or write. I mean, that was, think about that. I mean, now we're talking about censoring people, but if you're censoring somebody, they have the means of speaking. You're just saying, if you speak, we're going to punish you. Back then, the effort was, let's not allow these people even to read, write. Abolitionists were viciously attacked in the antebellum period. Again, in the second Reconstruction, suppression all over the place. And then in our own time, we're seeing it. Now, there is one thing that maybe we can take some solace from, and that is that every time there has been this effort to repress the people who were trying to mobilize racial progress. Every time there has been a reaction against it. So, you know, that's right, abolitionists were mobbed, abolitionists were killed, and that led to, in the first Reconstruction, a real attentiveness to freedom of expression. In the second Reconstruction, if one thinks about the liberalization of libel law, if one thinks about protection of mass dissent, if one thinks about organizational privacy, those were all things, you know, progressive reforms that were in reaction against repression. We'll see if it happens this time. I'm hoping we'll see it this time.
Ever the optimist, Randy.
Ever the optimist, yes.
Well, actually, and speaking of, you know, you were talking about how enslaved people were barred from learning to read, right? You're from South Carolina, right? One first, you know, slave code that effectively banned slaves from being able to read was in South Carolina in 1740. So, considering, you know, the sort of illiberal move towards book bans now, why hasn't there been a more forceful response from those who pushed back on book bans and sort of illiberalization of democracy prior, as in this kind of current moment? Can you sort of speak to what prevents people from pushing back against
Our
actual
conversation
book
that
bans?
I've asked you many times before.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, first, I think it should be understood that, you know, there are people who are pushing back. It takes time. It takes forums like this to educate and to prompt. And I think we're going to have to continue to educate and to prompt and to urge people to speak up and to tell people, hey, listen, you know, you don't speak up. It may be these people, you know, today. It'll be you tomorrow. So we better, you know, get out and make our voices heard. I think another thing that's going on also is that, you know, there are people who have been critical of critical race theory. And I think some of the folks in that camp have been, that's inhibited them. Their problems with critical race theory, or what they think is critical race theory, because a lot of people, even in the academy, who, you know, talk about critical race theory, they too have a stereotyped, narrow, you know, vision of it. And I think some of them have probably tried to sit out this struggle because they didn't want to, you know, be seen as, you know, as being on the same side as critical race theorists. I think that's a big mistake, and I hope that as time goes on, people will rectify that mistake.
Absolutely.
So we have this conversation a lot, right? And I agree. I would say that one of the reasons that there's so much sluggishness is because the left, and I'll say the left is everybody other than the right at this point. I think in society now that's kind of what it is. There are questions about, well, I see that they're trying to burn this building, but what's the building for? Who's in it? What are they doing? Whereas the other side is like, all right, critical race theory is what we're after. Okay, bring out the pitchforks. We're there. So there's an asymmetry, I think, in the response, largely because of that. And here's my other thing. I do think that there is a way in which mainstream punditry and media participate in, unwittingly, in a strategy to create a false controversy. Then it becomes visual. You see all the people going to the school boards. And so then, you know, the reporters come in and do a both sides kind of thing. And that is laundering a false set of stories, misinformation laundering. And we have to figure out how not to do that. What are the questions that should be asked? Not, do you really hate little white kids? That's ridiculous. But one could ask, What is behind this? Critical race theory has been around for 40 years. Why is it suddenly the threat to Western civilization that I'm hearing on this network that it is? Asking who's behind it, what's the money behind it, what are the objectives that people have said, we're going after public education. That ability to really take on what's happening, I think we're behind the ball on it, partly because we don't really know how to talk about race and white supremacy in a comfortable way. So colorblindness becomes the default. We're not really even able to talk about January 6th in a fully robust way. So this, I think, is a moment where we have to grow up real quickly and be literate about race and racism, because our democracy really depends on us doing so, and doing so really quickly.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll actually wrap it there for today. Professors Crenshaw and Kennedy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And now for a conversation about the future of reproductive rights. Please welcome Alexis McGill Johnson, President and CEO of Planned Parenthood Federation of America, with Atlantic contributing writer Jamel Hill.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. As we all know, right now there's a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty around reproductive rights, where we stand in this country in the wake of Roe versus Wade being overturned by the Supreme Court. For me, this is a very personal issue. As I wrote about in the Atlantic, the first time I publicly disclosed that I had an abortion when I was 26. So this conversation, this time in America, is very meaningful for me personally, as it is for everybody in the room and those who are watching at home. So I'm very pleased to be able to have this conversation here with Alexis, who is the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood and also the Planned Parenthood Action Fund. So let's start with where we are right now, Alexis, and we're in a post-Roe versus Wade world. So what does that world look like from the Planned Parenthood perspective?
First of all, it's an honor to be here with you, and thank you so much for sharing your story, right? Because I think part of why we are here is because of the stigma, right? Because we haven't actually normalized an experience that roughly 1 in 4 women, trans and non-binary folks will have in their lifetime, and the fact that we are here now almost 50 years. Just within a couple of months after the Dobbs decision, we're at 17 states now that are at a ban, total ban or near ban. That means 1 in 3 women, trans or non-binary folk are not able to get access to abortion in their home state. We've been able to look at the data coming out of Texas, out of SB8, and we've seen that our patients have been traveling 400 miles on average driving to get access to care. It means for some of them, they've been leaving at the end of a shift, taking a long ride to get access, medication abortion in most cases, getting to a place, having to take the first medication on site in state, and then getting in their car and having to drive back 400 miles. It means they have to think about all the kinds of things that go with those logistics, right? The where to stay, what to do with your children, because most people who seek access to abortion are already mothers. It means that the providers are very concerned. There has been a chilling effect along with this chaos that we've seen. There's so much confusion because the opposition has been doubling down on all of these horrific additional bans. Right to travel, you can't go across state lines, or we don't know. In Utah, they introduced a political stunt, as it were, but to say, you retroactively, we may find you are non-compliant and we may be able to take away your license. So people are literally operating under the most extreme circumstances, trying to get basic normal health care. And so it's been devastating.
So for Planned Parenthood, how have you all had to shift your approach, seeing what this new world looks like?
So unfortunately, we have the distinct pleasure of being professional scenario planners, right? We've been, having to respond to defund attacks. We've been seeing this really coming down the pike for the last decade and a half. When we look back to the 2010, 2011 Congress, and you saw the capture not only of the Congress through the Tea Party, you also saw a dramatic shifting of the state houses. And during that time, we saw ban after ban after ban after ban. So we've been on defense for a long time, preparing a muscle of what it would take to actually get people the care that they need and provide the real-time legal counsel and medical counsel to our providers and our health centers. But it's been exhausting, right? I mean, we are at a place now where we have regional logistics centers set up. We have working with our partners and a coalition in the reproductive justice movement and other independent providers setting up ways to navigate on websites like literally like the kayak of abortion care, abortionfinder.org, that is being run by Power to Decide. These are the kinds of things that we've had to build and imagine because the immediate future state right now is traveling outside of your state. We've also had to think about, again, what does it mean for people who don't have the resources to get out of state? The fact that there are people who are being forced right now into birth that they didn't decide to do.
So how does this decision, the Dobbs decision, the overturning of Roe versus Wade, tie into what seems to be a larger fight for democracy itself?
Yeah, I mean, I keep asking myself towards what end, right? When you actually look at, what is happening right now, it is the opposition has been relentless, and it's not just been the gerrymandering, remaking the state houses. It's been the court capture, right, all the way up to the Supreme Court. But really, in all of these other circuits that are trying these decisions out, over 1,000 bans have been introduced in the last decade, trying to get to this place of overturning Roe. And it's not actually having the intended effect. I mean, for some, right, it is stopping people ability to get access to abortion care. But for a lot of people, it's just making it more inconvenient, right? It's like patients who are seeking appointments much later in term. It means that they've got to go multiple states, get on a plane. We had one patient who showed up in, I think, Rhode Island and got there and then had to call her insurer and her doctor at home in order to, get permission. It's just adding these layers of burden that are insane. So it's not actually stopping abortion, right? It's not actually investing in children, right? The current children that we have, there are no additional bills that we're seeing, taxes going to the welfare states. Many of these states that are the most extreme in abortion bans are also the same ones that have the highest maternal mortality rate. They're the ones that have the lowest, child welfare rate. They're not invested in Medicaid reimbursement under ACA. There's nothing that they are doing that is actually saying that they're going to help people, right? And then you just look at the broad scheme and you say, this was never really just about abortion, right? It's about control, and it's about consolidation of power, and it's about what happens when you have essentially a tyranny of the minority, right? A vocal minority able to determine the laws of the land in your state, contrary to what the constituents think. Because we know the great majority of Americans believe that abortion should be accessible in their state, and they support legal access. And in each state, even the ones that have the most restrictive states, they're now kind of trying to understand, wait, what just happened, right? They're a little bit like the dog that caught the car.
Yeah, there's been an escalation too, because originally I think the narrative was, I'll let the states decide. That was sort of the common framing to try to get people to maybe think that the overturning of Roe wasn't as bad because, all the states will decide, as if we hadn't heard that particular argument made before about other rights. And so now that Lindsey Graham has sort of went against what he said originally, which is not surprising, that originally he said the states are going to decide. Now he's saying, no, we're introducing a national 15-week abortion ban. So how do you all combat the fact that now what's on the table is there being a national ban to abortion?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that it's been very interesting to watch the GOP over the last few months, be so vociferous, on one level and joyous in celebrating the Dobbs decision, and then literally start to scrub their websites and, back away from the things that they have clearly been on record saying. And so what's interesting is when the leak decision came down, that itself was such a shocker that I think it just all captured our attention. Prior to the leak, we our polling said that, even almost a year or, 7-8 months into SB 8, that only 30% of Americans actually thought Roe was really threatened, right? So, 70% of Americans thought that the court was going to let Roe stand. And then the leak happened, and then we, obviously knew, what was coming down the pipe. What was interesting is that same day, that morning, the opposition had actually said that they were much more interested in a nationwide 6-week ban. And so they had been forecasting this for a while, and there was a very extreme, obviously side of the extremist anti-abortion movement that is, also looking to a complete abolition, right, including criminalization of the mother. And so we have known that this is the end game, right? For this vocal minority, it is about ending access to abortion. It isn't about state rights, which I keep saying. Is it about trying to get control and consolidation of power for the implementation of a Christian nationalist state? Like what is it actually? The end game here, and when you start to see the ways in which the confusion and the interpretation of some of the bans and how that's impacting folks like providers who are not allowed to give abortion care, for patients who have intended pregnancies that are no longer viable. They're literally sending them home in some cases to wait until something like sepsis sits in, not something like till sepsis sits in. And they don't, or you see like Ken Paxton in the Attorney General in Texas say he's going to refuse the imposition of HHS and the EMTALA law to make sure that a patient could be treated in an emergency. You don't really get what their actual end game is other than control and consolidation of power.
At this point, with the environment and with everything that's going on, our role in the media, how should we be framing, how should we be discussing, writing about, speaking about what's happening right now with abortion?
Well, that's why I started thanking you for your story, right? Because I think we are here now watching, essentially our inequality be further codified into law. You can't do that unless you have a narrative that actually justifies that inequality. And oftentimes what we see in media, even as, we look at the polling and you could debate if it's somewhere between, 72% or 80% of Americans believe that Roe should be the law of the land or should have been the law of the land. The reality is the majority of people do support access to abortion in their state. And yet media often treats it like it's a false equivalence, right? They're both sides, of the conversation. And then that translates into people, corporations who are trying to figure out what to do, and they're worried about, again, the vocal minority wielding their power over their ability to engage in the conversation. So the both sidesism, I think, is the false equivalence, I say, is a huge challenge. There's also a lot of sensationalism in it, right? It's easy to rattle off a story because I know it will be heartbreaking to hear about a patient with an intended pregnancy who is, going to go home and wait until they get sepsis before they have to come in. Or we've all heard the stories of the 10-year-old in Ohio who had to travel to Indiana, or these debates and the conversations really centering around the exceptions, right? The exceptions. That's where all the conversation is happening. But the reality is, the great majority of people who have access or who have abortion, just, people who don't have any extraordinary circumstances, they've just made a decision that their body is their own and that this is what they need to do in order to further their own, freedom or imagination. So it's really just their own exercise of self-determination. And so for media to not be able to capture that, to only think about more of the sensational stories, it makes it harder to really normalize, again, what is, something that I'm sure many of you all in this room, you've had abortion, somebody who's had an abortion, love somebody who's had an abortion, and that should just be a normal state.
Yeah, and that honestly had a big reason why I decided to write about it in The Atlantic, is because I think people have a picture in their mind of who gets an abortion.
Yes.
It's like I was 26, I didn't have any other children, I just didn't want any kids. I mean, it was just that simple. Yes. So I think it's important as women that we find a voice for that, so that people don't think that you have to have a traumatic circumstance or a dire circumstance in order to not just be eligible, but feel comfortable in making this decision for you. along those same lines and looking at how this conversation is framed, it's not just the conversation taken in the media, but the conversation taking place in our own homes. And I'm wondering, how do we discuss something as, sort of polarizing as abortion within our own homes, knowing that there is a lot of moral ambiguity for people, because they may support access, but then they start thinking about, well, how many weeks is too far along, or this or that. So how do we carry this conversation in our own homes in this kind of climate?
Yeah, well, so I actually would argue that, again, it is far more normalized than we think in everyday homes and at everyday tables, right? I think that we are, subject to this idea that it is these extreme debates on both sides. And a lot of times, like your point around, who thinks of, who can have a good abortion versus, a deserving abortion versus not, like it mirrors a lot of the echoes of conversations that we have that are very intersected with race and poverty, right? Like who is using abortion as as birth control versus who is like in dire straits, and that's what I think we need to disrupt in these conversations, because it is it's healthcare, right? It's a very normal experience. I think having these conversations in our homes and at our tables, I think are very much like any other conversations that we have. We've seen largely with young people, with people of color, with Black people, the increasing support for abortion without any restrictions has actually been on the rise significantly over the last decade, and in large part because they understand that it is the opening salvo to ending democracy, right? They actually see the authoritarianism coming in behind these abortion bans that are going to, that intersect with, these are the same states that are impacting voting rights, the same states that are, introducing the anti-CRT bills, the same ones that are introducing the anti-trans bills. And they see the erosion of democracy even as, democracy itself hasn't really been fully realized. So I see abortion in many ways as an opportunity to save democracy, because it is forcing us to have these conversations state by state in a way, and engaging in direct democracy to do so.
Now, presumably, as we sort of wind down this conversation, there will be an uptick in unwanted pregnancies. So in your position with Planned Parenthood, what does that support look like now that you guys know that there's going to be an uptick in certain areas because of this?
Look, Planned Parenthood has always been a resource for someone who gets pregnant or chooses to get pregnant or chooses to not be pregnant or raise a child for adoption. So that's not going to change our core mission, right? Which is to help people live fully, self-determined lives and futures. It means that in banned states, we are going to continue to do what we've always done, provide access to birth control while they try to criminalize it, right? One lawmaker the other day compared Plan B to fentanyl. So that's what we're dealing with here. Not only just these extreme kind of, associations, but also people who really don't even understand how our bodies work. And so that's the kind of thing that we are going to do to educate the people who are being very deliberately miseducated. We will be connecting with all kinds of services and really advocating. I think the work that we have to do now on our Action Fund side is to really mobilize, to really make sure that we are, seeing all of these increasing registrations from folks across the states. We're seeing wins like we had in Kansas. We're seeing the energy. Yes, you can cheer for Kansas. Michigan, again, these are going to be, one way that we can fight back and at least preserve more access in states will be by ballot measure. There are federal options. And then, we're going to have to fight like hell to get back in the Constitution, because that's where we belong.
Well, that's a word right there. And I'm so glad that you said that about the other services that Planned Parenthood provides, because when I was in college, Planned Parenthood was like my lifeline. That's where I got my birth control pills. That's where you got condoms. It was through Planned Parenthood. Alexis, I want to thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. Everybody stay engaged. Obviously, this is an issue that we have to just be continually vigilant about. So thank you for sharing Planned Parenthood's perspective.
Thank you.
Now for a session produced by our underwriter, Pfizer. A cycle of uncertainty, the rare disease patient's journey to diagnosis. Please welcome Suneet Varma, Global Oncology and U.S. President of Pfizer.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Suneet Varma, and I'm currently, as you heard, the president of Pfizer Oncology. But in the years preceding that, because I was just named on September 1st, I was the president of Pfizer's Rare Diseases. And for me, that was not just a job, it was a purpose. And it was a very personal one at that. The reason being is that my daughter, Asha, was born with a rare genetic anomaly. And between my wife's hospitalization, maternal hospitalization, her time in the NICU, it was 5 months at Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto in 2010. I'll tell you more about Asha in a moment, but I'd like to talk about rare diseases first and the challenges that millions of people suffering with rare diseases face. Sorry, just 1 second here. I think there's a jam on, oh, there it is. So what is a rare disease? In the US, a rare disease is defined as any patient group that is 200,000 patients or less. And in the size of a country like the United States, that's about 0.5% of the population. So small, and hence the name rare. However, when you consider that there are 7,000 rare diseases in the world, and you combine them collectively, they're not so rare anymore. In fact, 400 million people worldwide suffer from rare diseases, making them one of the most, let's say, universal categories of patients that are underserved, almost the same size as cancer. And cancer has a certain universality and omnipresence to it. Of these 7,000 rare diseases, 80% are genetic in origin, and 50% of them affect children. And much like Asha, 30%, let me say this, 50% of those children, sorry, let me start over. I'm dropping some facts here, and I want to make sure I get the numbers exactly right. 1 in 3 of those children do not make it to their 5th birthday. Okay, and that is a real tragedy. Rare diseases are often progressive, debilitating, and significantly impacting patients and their families. And as you can imagine, these diseases take a significant financial toll on the families, the healthcare system, and society as a whole, but it's largely unrecognized. But despite all this clear need, 95% of rare diseases have no treatment option whatsoever. And that makes this, as I said, one of the most underserved patient communities in the world. So let's talk about what's driving that. There are 2 major problems that we need to attack. One is underdiagnosis, and the other is undertreatment. When you think about underdiagnosis, this is where there is a treatment option available, but the patients are not getting the correct diagnosis. Because the individual rare diseases are so uncommon, the symptoms and the effects are often unidentified, and families struggle to get an appropriate diagnosis. The process becomes, hence the title of this talk, a cycle of uncertainty. They go years without getting an appropriate treatment because there's no awareness, nobody knows what the disease is, nobody can identify the symptoms, including the doctors. So 8 years is a long time to go to get a correct diagnosis. It leads to, frankly, problems even in sophisticated countries with well-developed healthcare systems like the United States. Many families spend years bouncing around receiving multiple misdiagnoses. Very frustrating, as you can imagine. And this prolonged period of uncertainty can be profound on many levels, emotionally, physically, mentally, and financially. This results in delays that could have helped patients and their families sooner. So let's focus now on undertreatment. This is the reverse. This is where the patient does have a diagnosis, but then they soon learn that there is no treatment option available for them, or that they cannot access that treatment. Remember, 95% of rare diseases have no treatment options. So for patients who are lucky enough to get a correct diagnosis, then they are told there is no treatment choice. Imagine that. So there are many reasons why so few rare diseases have treatment options. Obviously, there's poor understanding of the diseases since they're so small individually, but collectively so large, but they all have different patterns that, say, emerge. Conducting research and clinical trials in this space is also challenging because the patient group is so thinly and widely dispersed around the globe, which makes it very challenging. And in any case, I can't really say which is worse. Having a diagnosis, but finding out there's no treatment, or suffering for many years without a correct diagnosis. So let me talk about what solutions could be on the horizon from a policy point of view to deal with diagnosis and treatment, that patient journey that we can all positively affect. Thankfully, the science is moving rapidly, and we're on the cusp of many new breakthroughs. There are about 700 products in development today, including gene therapy, that are on the cusp of gaining approval and coming to the hands of the patients and the caregivers. We need stronger policy and legislation to ensure that all patients have timely and accurate diagnoses and access to the treatment. No patient should be left behind. We can dramatically improve the diagnostic pathway through newborn screening. I know it sounds basic, but believe it or not, this is not a common thing in the United States, or consistently, I should say. Every state has their own way of doing newborn screening, and they do not all comply with the federal list. So what happens is, depending upon the zip code you're born in, you may or may not have certain genetic screens done when you're born. This leaves hundreds of babies undetected and without timely access to care every year. It's hard to imagine. But to ensure that babies born in every state in the United States have the same opportunity for a diagnosis, it's really important to pass legislation at the local level requiring states to screen all newborn babies for any disorder that is on the federal list. And with that screening, frankly, we'll make a giant step forward into the consistency of helping those babies when they're born. As I said, there should be no more death by zip code. Let's also talk about driving innovation to create new treatments. And many people may have heard of the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, or PDUFA. This is an incentive for regulatory pathways and drug development in rare diseases that we believe should be protected and even expanded. And this will give the best chance for everybody who's diagnosed to gain access to the treatment that they need. For example, today in the United States, the House and Senate are actively working to pass legislation to reauthorize PDUFA, which is already in existence. This will accelerate drug development in so many ways. It will allow us to provide resources for cell and gene therapy, which is the most pioneering of sciences that we have. It will advance real-world evidence, which is an important factor. We even saw that at play during COVID. This will also allow us to validate new rare disease endpoints, because these diseases have never been studied in the way we're proposing to study them. And it will protect the integrity of the accelerated pathway, which essentially gets medicines to the patients who need it as fast as possible. So we are calling on Congress to reauthorize PDUFA in advance of the October 1st sunset date, so we can continue to incentivize and drive forward the scientific innovation for those new treatments. The patients, as I said, are waiting. And let me say, yes, hope is on the horizon. Let me close where I started, and that is with my daughter, Asha. My wife and I chose her name. Sorry, it gets a little emotional. My wife and I chose her name because Asha means hope in Sanskrit. And that is the emotion we held on to when my wife was pregnant with her. Asha was really born with that sense of hope and lived her childhood with that same sense of hope. And by the way, she's still around today. I just want to make sure you know that before I show. She still deals with some physical deficits, but basically she's perfect in every other way. As you can see from this picture, she leads a robust and happy life. She's funny, she's quirky, and she's super social. She's the one in the glasses in any picture that you see, or red earmuffs. Those are her two signature moves. She has a red belt in Taekwondo, and she just finished a Broadway summer camp of a production of Beauty and the Beast. She was a peasant in the ensemble cast. But this is what I want for every rare disease patient. We want them to be able to live their lives full of joy, of laughter, and most of all, hope, her namesake. I'm optimistic that we can make this happen if we keep pressing on the two fronts. We have to prioritize innovation to create new life-changing, life-saving treatments to treat these patients. And equally as important, we have to make sure we advance the policy environment to make sure, like newborn screening, we have the most timely and accurate and proper diagnosis possible. Every patient should have access to the care that they need. that they deserve, that they want. So because many rare disease patients can't afford to wait, I think you would agree with me that they shouldn't have to. So let's change their experience and let's change it together. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Here to explore lessons learned from the pandemic, please welcome Syra Madad, infectious disease epidemiologist and senior director of system-wide special pathogens program at NYC Health Plus Hospitals. David Quammen, author of Breathless, The Scientific Race to Defeat a Deadly Virus. And Elizabeth Wrigley Field, assistant professor of sociology at the University of Minnesota. Here to lead the conversation is Atlantic staff writer Ed Yong.
All right. Hello, everyone. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I'm used to it by now. This will all happen again. What we've lived through over the last 3 years is not some generational oddity, but one chapter of this era of epidemics that we find ourselves living in. In 2018, I wrote a piece for a little-known magazine called The Atlantic about how unprepared America was for the next pandemic. And sadly, that diagnosis hasn't changed very much. The COVID pandemic isn't over, no matter how badly the president wants to pretend that it is. We have a monkeypox epidemic underway. More diseases, new and re-emerging, are imminent. Fortunately, we do have 3 excellent guests here today to help us to make sense of these risks and the hard work that still lies ahead of us. David Quammen is a journalist and author of 17 books, including Spillover and his new book, Breathless, The Scientific Race to Defeat a Deadly Virus, which is out next month. Please pre-order that. Dr. Syra Madad is the Senior Director of the System-Wide Special Pathogens Program at NYC Health and Hospitals, and that she's an expert in infectious diseases, and she's been neck-deep in the responses to both COVID and monkeypox. And Professor Elizabeth Wrigley Field is a sociologist at the University of Minnesota, where she specializes in racial inequality, in mortality, and infectious disease. She's also been doing some amazing grassroots work, getting vaccines into the arms of marginalized communities as part of the Seward Vaccine Equity Project. So to talk about the risk of that epidemics continue to pose to us, I'd like to start with you, David. You've written extensively about spillovers, how they happen, what might be done to mitigate the risk of them happening. I want to ask how you're thinking about the emergence of new diseases in the light of the last few years and what now needs to be done.
Well, as you said, Ed, this is not the last. You wrote about it in 2018. When I published Spillover in 2012, I was channeling scientists who had told me the big one is coming, there will be a pandemic, it will be caused by an RNA virus, for instance, an influenza or a coronavirus. So no surprise there. Surprised that we were so unprepared. We need to be much better prepared next time, because there will be, as you said, another, could very well be an influenza, a bird flu that adapts for human transmission. We need more science. We need more surveillance. We need more preparation for the containment of outbreaks. As the scientists have said, spillovers are common, but pandemics are rare. And we can keep them rare if we have enough surveillance, enough education of people that there will be another one, so that when the next spillover turns into an outbreak of 10 people, 20 people, 30 people in some remote place, it can be contained before it spreads into an epidemic that becomes a pandemic. We can be sure that we will be challenged that way.
Okay. And it seems that no matter how good we get at reducing those risks, they will always be with us, that we can expect spillovers to happen, and maybe we'll be unlucky enough for more of them to create the sort of worldwide spread that we've been seeing. When that happens, diseases then test to the healthcare systems of the countries that they land in. And so you've seen this firsthand, unfortunately. I wondered if you could tell us about the state of the US healthcare system in the wake of these last 3 COVID years, and what now needs to happen to steel it for whatever happens next.
Yeah, so I'm sure everybody remembers the very catchy phrase, early on in the pandemic, and that holds true even today when we look at risk reduction, where a lot of these metrics are now falling under. It's, flatten the curve, and that was for hospitals, right? We didn't want to strain our hospital capacity. Now, my background is in emergency management, and so I'm going to distill it down to the 4 S's that we often talk about in emergency management: staffing, supplies, space, and system. And so when we talk just about staffing, that's the most important asset to any healthcare system. And as you all know, this nation is facing a healthcare worker crisis, not just because of COVID-19 burnout and fatigue, but because it's constant, and there's not a lot of resource and support, that goes on in that sense. And certainly many healthcare systems are much more resourced than others, but there certainly is a dire healthcare worker crisis in this country, and it's only going to get worse. So if we look at what have we learned, we need to have more healthcare workers. We need to have more primary care, focus on primary care. And what this is doing is it's going to take away access to healthcare when you need it the most. The second, when we talk about supplies, and I'm sure everybody remembers the outcry of we need more N95s, we need more ventilators, we need more supplies. And luckily, we're obviously in a much better position now, but we should never be in that position again. So we need to build much better and more domestic capacity when it comes to supplies. The next is space, and as you all know, space is something in healthcare systems you have just a small amount of. It usually is a little bit easier to ramp up, but when we talk about outbreaks and pandemics, these are not one-day events. These are protracted events. Oftentimes are mass casualty events, and these are protracted mass casualty events. And even now, we have over 400 or 500 Americans dying every single day. That is a mass casualty event that's happening in this nation every single day. So we need to make sure they're developing, and sustaining both staffing, supplies, and space. And the last is system, right? And I can throw in so many different aspects into systems. But the one thing that I'll mention is we cannot rely on a crisis system. We need to rely on a 24/7, 365 system that works all year round and not just during emergencies, because then we will fail. So systems includes making sure that we have good systems for data collection, interoperability with public health, so we know who's dying, where are they dying, why are they dying, how are they dying. Some of the most basic questions we often even can't answer even today. So we need to have better data systems, both healthcare that feed into public health. We need to make sure we're looking at health equity. That's huge, right? If we learned anything from this COVID-19 pandemic, that needs to be first, it needs to be in the middle, it needs to be in the last. So a lot that we have learned from a healthcare perspective.
And I'm really glad you talked about systems, because I also then think about the social infrastructure of the country as one of the larger systems that have been problematic. Pandemics aren't just a medical problem, they're very much a social one too. And so, Elizabeth, as a sociologist, I wondered if you could talk about how you see that aspect of the pandemic, like to what extent the social fabric of the country affected our response to COVID.
I mean, the way you get through a crisis like a pandemic with everyone working toward the common good is you have to have a spirit that we're all in this together. And that has mostly not been the spirit of this pandemic in the way that we have responded. We left essential workers unprotected, without PPE, without improvements in air quality at their workplaces. We left healthcare workers at risk and burned out without embracing some basic social provisions for the long term, like universal paid sick leave. We've left people in long-term care extraordinarily vulnerable, as we saw in the early days of this pandemic. We still pay people who work in those facilities so little that they often work at more than one, going from one to the next. You couldn't create a better super spreader situation if you tried. And I think what covers all of this is that we allowed businesses to approach vaccinations as a way to wash their hands of their own responsibility and put all of it onto workers. You get a vaccine, you check people coming in to see if they have a vaccine. We don't have to do anything. And that creates a setting where people embrace a kind of every person for themselves response. What feels so tragic to me about that in this pandemic is that we've learned so much scientifically in these last few years that we've just squandered. The alternative context where we are better prepared for the next pandemic is so tangible, we're just not living in it.
Yeah, I agree. That it feels like something that isn't unachievable, but that still somehow is slightly beyond our grasp. And the three of you have talked about quite substantial challenges that I wanted to pick out a little bit. So, David, you talked about the importance of education, and I think the communication part of this pandemic has been paramount. And as a science writer, as someone who specializes in talking about these risks to people, how are you thinking about the communication challenges going forward? Like, how can we get better at talking about this problem?
Well, we have to get better. I mean, you face the same thing, Ed. You're a journalist. You've written a lot about this. People get COVID fatigue. People get issue fatigue. People get tired of hearing about the most important challenges that we face. People get tired of hearing about climate change. So the challenge is to make it fresh, to make people read what you're writing or listen to what you're saying, not because it's their duty, not because they think that you're going to tell them how to stay healthy and what they should do tomorrow, but in part because you find a fresh way to do it, because you tell a story, because you write about people and not just about viruses. Emerging viruses have the advantage that they're all about detective stories. There's a new virus that appears in Malaysia or in Bangladesh or in Wuhan, China. Never seen before, a novel virus, and it's infecting humans. What kind of virus is it? Where did it come from? What's the origin of the virus? People go out there, the disease detectives, these heroic people, the field ecologists and others who study these viruses, and it's this horrific adventure to solve the mystery of this new virus. So it's part of our duty and our opportunity, I think, too, to put that into our work, to give people the sense that science is not just a body of facts. Science is a process of incremental discovery and improvement of our understanding of the physical world, and it involves heroic people going out there, climbing through caves, trapping bats, sampling them, working in laboratories, working in biosafety level 4 laboratories with dangerous pathogens. It's heroic, adventuresome, exciting work by disease detectives, and that, I think, is the advantage that we have in this horrific situation.
Mm-hmm. And when I think about heroism in this space, as well as the virologists and the basic research scientists you've talked about, I also think about the people who've done work at the community level to try and protect the people around them. And Syra, you talked about the need not only for better staff, much more staffing at the healthcare system level, but also for more of an investment in primary care. I think arguably the US healthcare system is very tailored towards caring for people once they're extremely sick, rather than preventing sickness in the community. And I know you've thought a lot about this. Can you say more about what that might look like and why it's important?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, the World Health Organization Director General, Dr. Tedros, I think says it best, and he just actually tweeted about it. And he says, healthcare starts, in the community, at home, at workplace, not in the hospitals. Hospitals are not the front lines, right? They are the last lines. That's when things are going really bad, is when you need emergency services. So we really need to make sure we're emphasizing early preventative care, primary care, and everybody should have access to primary care. And that is something that we still need to work on. In this country, we do a really great job in emergency medicine, right? We can save a whole lot of people. I also responded to Ebola, right? And we look at our Ebola cases. We did a phenomenal job when we talk about, saving individuals in that sense. But when it comes to preventative medicine, we are doing a terrible job, and we really need to emphasize that more. And that is really one of our key takeaways, is that we need to have a healthier population, a healthier community, if we are to prepare for and tackle the next outbreak. And right now, as you mentioned, I'm responding to monkeypox, and there's so many lessons learned from COVID that have been applied to monkeypox, and others that we unfortunately did not. And one of the things is we need to certainly do a much better job with communicating with the public of why it's so important to stay healthy, where you can get access to healthcare services and the like.
Thank you. And Elizabeth, I wanted to ask you to continue riffing off this idea, because you have done a lot of community-focused work in vaccine outreach, and we've talked about how valuable and how hope-building that has been for you. Can you say more about those efforts?
Yeah, I mean, this is a fundamentally pessimistic panel, right? For good reason, right? We've lost cultural ground on vaccines. We're on track to have excess mortality this year. Looks very much like last year, which is devastating. And we also have had a series of grassroots community vaccination networks that mean we have a legacy now of networks inside some of the most medically underserved communities in the United States of people who've tried to protect one another. And what that means is that people who want to do that know who each other are. They've learned some practical lessons about how you do a successful vaccine campaign. But I think most fundamentally, they have learned that when it feels like the state is abandoning you, you can actually band together with other people to try to stick up for one another's safety. And I don't want to paint too rosy a picture of this because I actually think that this work is in a pretty difficult moment right now. Everyone I know who's been involved in community vaccine organization, including me, feels pretty exhausted and demoralized right now at actually exactly the wrong moment with the new bivalent boosters. But I guess I also feel like on some fundamental level, like who cares? Because how we feel at this moment is not what's going to determine how those networks get used in the long term. And I think if we do end up prepared for the next pandemic, it'll be partly because people did try to figure out how to protect each other this time in this really grassroots way.
Yeah, it feels like we can't afford the luxury of nihilism in this. The challenge is substantial. But
we're an optimistic, pessimistic panel.
That's right. Yes. No. Thank you for setting up the next question I was going to ask you. So, as someone who has wrote about this risk long before COVID was a thing that affected humans, you and I both know that it's difficult to have done that work but still see tragedy unfold for you. So, thinking about the current status, David, like how are you feeling hopeful? What is motivating you to continue trying to tell these kinds of stories?
I think what's motivating me is that there's no alternative. We know that there is another one coming. There are more of these coming. We can do better next time. We won't necessarily do better, but there is a chance. Just as that there is a chance that we can control climate change, there's a chance that we can control the loss of biological diversity. And those are the three big challenges that face us on this planet. The threat of pandemic disease, loss of biological diversity, and climate change. And it's easy to wake up in the morning and say, oh, there's no hope. Oh, my God. But what better way to put meaning in your life than to say, no, we can never give up. These things are too important. You fight to the very end. You make incremental progress. You mitigate the disasters as you go. You see heroism in people that are trying to do this. And you see small, important successes. And you and I, we amplify those. We trumpet those successes. We tell those stories. And that helps everybody go on.
I think it's useful and perhaps a bit daunting, but certainly useful to remember that the three problems that you talked about are just facets of the same mega problem. They're all deeply threaded together. Climate change worsens the risk of pandemics in the future in a way that the loss of biodiversity also contributes to. And so going off this theme of continuing to fight and retaining hope, sorry, you talked about the staffing problems that the US healthcare system is facing right now. What might be done to address the losses of talented healthcare workers that have happened over the last few years?
Yeah, it's not just so much about the loss, it's also the brain drain, right? So when you lose healthcare workers, healthcare professionals, and the like, you're losing all that experience and many of those best practices and the like with that. And so even if you have a fresh workforce, you're really starting from ground zero. So A, obviously we need to do much more with increasing the workforce, and then B, we need to make sure that we have better systems in place to provide on-the-ground training and education. So when we have these types of pandemics, healthcare workers had no training when it came to COVID-19, when we had to say, use the same N95 not just once, but 5 times over in that sense, right? We need to have more robust training around outbreaks. But the one thing that I do want to mention is that, and this is something that was just echoed, is that pandemics are preventable, right? And we often conflate preparedness and prevention. And preparedness is knowing an event's going to happen and you're going to build a preparedness plan. Prevention is getting to the root cause. And we really need to focus very much on prevention just as much. This should not have happened. These are never events. And so absolutely pandemics are preventable in that sense, but we really need to have that political support.
I totally agree. And Elizabeth, just to finish off then, the COVID exposed and widened so many of the inequalities that have been deeply rooted in the US and are the things that you studied even before COVID happened. And those, feel much like what we talked about to be very, very difficult, gargantuan problems that also we cannot look away from. So how are you thinking about the need to handle that going forward in spite of the sheer scope of the challenge?
There's no shortcut around these problems. As devastating as the last few years have been, white mortality during the COVID pandemic has been less than African American mortality is every single year in the United States. So that's the challenge if you think about preventing death. I think a lot about ACT UP as a model to learn from. And one of the things it did is it combines this kind of direct service provision, the way that the community vaccination networks this time around have, but they combined it with a direct challenge to power, state power, powerful institutions like the Catholic Church and the media. And that's a piece that I think has been missing this time. And to me, that sort of says, well, if we want to do better the next time, that's something to think about.
Thank you. I completely agree. Thanks to all three of you for your brilliant insights today. Thank you for listening.
Now for a session produced by our underwriter, the Walton Family Foundation. Here to discuss engaging the next generation of bold thinkers to accelerate common solutions, please welcome Carol M. Stern, Executive Director of the Walton Family Foundation, journalist Rachel Janfazza, and Dean Ray Sykes, a college senior attending Howard University.
Good afternoon, and thank you to the Atlantic Festival, Carol and Dean Ray. So as we think about fostering conversation, intergeneral conversation, Dean Ray, in your perspective, what does collaboration look like to Gen Z?
Yeah, I think collaboration to Gen Z means providing a space and opportunity for our generation to have idea exploration and to tackle the controversial issues of today. I think in many indirect philosophical senses, my generation, we are attempting to ask or re-ask questions pertaining to the human condition that we believe generations prior ignored or didn't answer. So I think, for example, in a metaphysical sense, what exists in the universe, or the universe is beyond, or in an epistemological sense, what is knowledge? How do we know things, and how does that influence our beliefs or the things that do or don't exist? I think lastly, in a political sense, the very social and political norms of today, what legitimacy do they still hold today, and why are we still holding on to them? So, yeah.
And Carol, with that in mind, how is the Walton Family Foundation thinking about fostering collaboration with the next generation of leaders?
So our research has shown that your generation definitely wants to collaborate. And I think the most remarkable thing we learned in our research was how hopeful and optimistic your generation is. One big difference, though, between yours and mine, aside from the maybe 50 years, is that my generation believed the institutions of this country were going to give us the American dream. And your generation believes you're going to give you the American dream. And that's a really big change. But you're demanding that we do it together. You're a we generation, not a me generation. And you want to collaborate. And yet, 67% of Americans are saying that they can't sit at a table with someone who disagrees with them. They're not prepared to come to that table. So as a foundation, we're working to redefine collaboration. Let's get away from the historical view that collaboration means we have to find those with common ground and come together. Instead, we need to find common solutions. We need to be willing to sit at the table with the people we don't agree with and work towards the things that we all agree our society needs right now. It's too late to start saying this way or that way. We've got to find solutions.
And so Gen Z is often skeptical that today's leaders have the next generation's best interest in mind. What are the implications of that, Dean Ray? And Carol, how do we work to move forward with that?
Yeah, I think our generation sometimes looking at those leaders in power, we're saying that we're looking to replace them, whenever their time is done in their positions of power and social influence. Because it seems as if sometimes, the ideas that being bold social thinkers, it's like there's a hesitation to do that, the generation that are older than us, and we're saying like, no, we have the ideas, these century-defining ideas that help change this world, and we don't want to wait 50 years, because if we wait 50 years to implement our ideas right now, they'll be 50 years too late. So we want to implement them right now so that we don't stagnate or acquiesce in, our political endeavors. So.
And I think philanthropy has a really unique role in all of that. Philanthropy is built on legacy. It is, usually wealth that has been put together to bring a family together to do good. And we all want to stand on the legacy that has been given to us. But our intentions are really to build the future that we're going to leave behind. And I think that one of the primary messages we're getting from your generation is we have to listen better. We have to be willing to open our ears. We have to make sure there's a seat at the table for you, and that we have to also make sure you've got a microphone in front of that seat. And if the power of our microphone is stronger, then we've got to pass the mic to you. Because it is time for us to understand that this nation doesn't only need identified leaders, it needs a coalition to bring us together.
Absolutely.
Got it. Well, thank you so much to you both, and thank you all. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Here to discuss the evolution of the music industry, please welcome Recording Academy CEO Harvey Mason Jr. with Atlantic staff writer Spencer Kornhaber.
Exciting. I got the microphone. You don't have a microphone. You want to just
that's for the music guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I should have a headset
You're gonna get
so
up
I
and
can do choreo.
Yeah, absolutely, right?
All right. Anyways, thanks for having me. This is great.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Hi, everybody.
This
so
is
cool.
Harvey Mason Jr.
Evolution of the music industry. I love it.
Yeah, so that starts, what, 5,000 years ago?
Yeah, back in the drum days, people in Africa playing drums, and now we're here.
Yeah. So you are a change maker in the music industry.
Well, thank you. I take that as a compliment.
Yes. You started as the CEO of the Recording Academy in January of 2020, which was a little bit of an interesting moment for the Academy. Is that fair to say?
You're being nice. I mean, interesting is not the word. Yes, it was a controversial time. There was a lot of things happening, a lot of things swirling. And I was actually chair of the board. Previous to that, I'd been elected about 5-6 months before 2020 in the show in that period. And yes, we got into some hard times. We'll leave it at that, I guess.
Well, I should probably describe a little bit.
Yeah, go for it.
A few years of, big name musicians kind of questioning whether the Academy was as inclusive as it needed to be. And your predecessor had a very short and interesting reign that ended in a discrimination complaint. And then you have to come in and sort of be the guy to fix everything or change things. How did you go about that? What was the biggest challenge at the beginning?
Well, there were a lot of challenges, and you touched on a couple of them, but I have to say we are a 65-year-old organization, and for 63 of those years, we'd been doing incredible work. And we had been, the whole mission of the Recording Academy, for those of you that don't know, we put on the Grammy show and we give away the trophies and we award excellence for music and we honor what's happening in the year of music. But we do the other 364 days of the year, we do things that help music people. We're uplifting the industry, we're giving back, we're doing education, advocacy, safety net for music people who need help. So that's what the Academy is really about. So when you talk about the controversy or an artist that's upset about an award, that does come, it does go, but what's consistent is the work that we've done over the last 65 years. So when I got in place, first thing I did was we looked at all the work that was being done that was really important. We figured out how do we continue to do that, how do we elevate it, how do we expand on it, but we can't do any of it unless our show is right, because we get all of our revenue from our television show. We're on CBS through a Viacom partnership. We get revenue from the show. That revenue goes directly back into all the programs that we do for music people. So the show is very important. The perception and the relevance of who we are as a show and as an award really basically funds a lot of what we do as an organization. So we looked at pretty much every part of the organization. We'd had a CEO that had been in place prior to me and prior to the one person that was there for a couple months for 17 years. He did amazing work, built the organization to where it was, but a lot of the same patterns had been formed. A lot of things had happened repeatedly and gotten in a bit of a cycle. So when I came in, I looked at everything. We looked at voting. We looked at membership. We looked at our staff. We looked at how we populate our committees, just how we did really everything, and made changes. And I didn't do it alone. We had an incredible team. We had a great board. But I like to think we've made huge strides over the last 24 months.
Yeah. One of those things is making the Academy bigger, right? Like bringing more people into it.
A little bit. We have 24,000 members, 13,000 of which roughly are voting members. So one thing you all should know is our award is entirely voted on by members. To be a member, you have to be a professional in the industry. So if you're working as an engineer, a songwriter, or a producer, you can apply for membership. As you're a member, you can vote. So there's no committees, there's no media, there's no other way that you can win a Grammy Award unless your peers vote for you. So we haven't really expanded our membership, but what we've done is gone into areas of our membership where we were weak or where we were light. We needed more representation in different genres. We needed more gender parity. We need other things to happen in our membership that we've really gone over and above kind of where we wanted to be and starting to push those boundaries further and further back and make those changes. And the membership is what drives everything in the Academy. All of our nominations, all of our awards, all of our proposals are all driven by membership. It's not me or somebody else sitting back in an ivory tower saying, oh, I like that record. It's done by our membership. So when you talk about expanding the Academy, what we've really tried to do is make sure our membership is relevant and reflective of music and what's going on in culture.
Right. It's sort of like a democratic body. And,
exactly.
And so your goal is to actually represent who is in the music industry as a whole, whatever that means.
Yeah, and our goal is to make sure that our committees are reflective, our board is reflective, our membership is reflective, people that work at the Academy have to be reflective. And I've just found over the last 24 months, I think we all have found that getting more different types of people together, more different diversity, more representation is really resulting in better outcomes for everything we're doing, including the nominations and the Grammys, but other day-to-day decisions that are being made just in our processes around the Academy and what we do.
Yeah, so what were some of those like areas of the industry that you wanted to bring in that were not as represented before?
We need more women. I mean, it's very simple. We need more women. We need more people of color. We needed more genres other than pop, or really pop was the most popular genre, and most of our membership, not all of it, but most of it was leaning towards pop. So when you would see a pop artist on the ballot, they would tend to win because our membership it skews very heavily towards white men in pop. So, I mean, I'm not a white man, so I came in and I said, something doesn't look right with the membership. How do we figure this out? We just really looked at the data, and we knew what the percentages were, and we made changes. We went into different communities, different genres of music, and we started inviting people, said, can you join us? We need, not only just because we wanted to be diverse, I mean, sounds a little superficial, but I really felt like the music industry is diverse. I come from the industry. I'm a songwriter. I'm a producer, so I know this industry. We had to have representation, first of all, because we can't vote on music if we don't know it. If you're a big classical artist or a composer or a conductor, you probably don't know a lot about hip hop. Right? If you're a hip hop artist, you probably don't know the latest concerto. But having people from diverse areas being able to evaluate music and make decisions, critical decisions based on the quality, is going to be dependent on your area of expertise, number one. Number two, having the diversity in our membership and on our staff just brought new energy, new ideas, new opinions, and not the same old thinking that was happening probably for us and other companies around the world where you've gotten in a rut and you've done things the same way over and over again. You need new ideas.
Yeah. You mentioned hip hop, which is arguably the most popular genre in America, right? Like more popular than pop.
It's not arguably. It's now
it like is.
34% of music is, yeah.
And so what has it been like to kind of reflect that representation in the Academy? How have you tried to bring in more of the hip hop community?
It's been an effort. It's definitely been a conscious decision to say, again, looking at music, looking at the industry, we want to be reflective, and we also have to be able to evaluate that music, as I said. So we go into different areas where we think we can recruit members, and we ask them, can you be a member? And they say, well, why should I be? And we explain to them why you should be. And I'll tell you a quick story, Spencer. There was a group, it was a gentleman that was very upset with the Academy because they didn't get a nomination. And I said, are you a member? He said, no, I'm not a member. I don't believe in it. I said, well, you might not believe in the award, but you're really mad about it, number one. But number two, come to find out, somebody from his band had an accident on the way to a tour, destroyed their instruments, and they called the Academy and said, we've lost our instruments and we have a show in 2 days. And we have an organization called Music Cares, which is one of our affiliates. And the whole goal of Music Cares is to be a safety net for music people, to give things when they need help. They need bills, medical attention, addiction recovery, mental health issues. This group of people called after the accident and said, we have a show in 2 days, we lost our instruments. Music Cares FedEx them instruments. And this is a group that works directly for the guy that was most mad at us one year. And I said,
and who was that?
And I said, what you don't understand is it's okay to be mad. I'm an artist too. I'm pissed when I don't get recognition and people don't think my music good. It hurts. When we make music, it comes from the soul and from the heart. But you can't try and detract from the organization that's going to 365 days a year lift music people and support and serve music people. And I don't know about all of you, but I think music is important. You've heard about some really important topics today. I've been listening backstage. Brilliant people up here, people that are changing the world. But I really believe music has a unique power. Music has a magical power to bring people together, to make change, to make a difference. And so when I see what the Academy does to help and serve music people that are making that difference, I don't believe that's something we should take lightly. I think that's something we should support.
Well, you guys just added a new award, right, for music for social change, the most socially conscious song.
Yeah.
What was the thinking behind adding that, and how do you think about quantifying social change in music? So you're talking about protest songs, right?
Songs that have a positive impact, social change. Yeah. That award is a special merit award, so it's not an official Grammy award. It's not going to be voted on by all the membership. This is an award that was established. First, you should know all of our awards, any change to our bylaws, to our governance proposals are made by our members. We don't create them. The staff doesn't make them. Members say, hey, I think it's important we honor music that's driving social change. And we say, great idea, let's implement it. So we implemented it. This particular award is really the only award like this, where we have a blue ribbon committee of people coming together, both people from the social change area, different activists, along with great songwriters coming together to evaluate all the songs that are submitted that year. And they'll pick one song that they feel has made an impact in social change.
Well, it's about impact. It's not about the message of the song itself. It has to have changed something.
That's the goal, yes, to have an impact, to have a change through the music and lyrics.
Do you have an example from music history of your favorite example of that happening?
I don't have a favorite, but I'll tell you this, that music has been at the forefront of all social change. Every time there's a movement, every time there's an event, every time there's a change in spirit or in mood, the momentum is not rallied by, but sometimes amplified through music. And so I find that to be more important now than almost ever, because there's so much going on. There's so much, and we've talked about it on this stage. I've heard a lot about it. Music is always just before something happens, as something's happening, and after, to tell the history of what's happened. So I think there's a lot of value in music and social change.
You guys do advocacy, and we talked about hip hop before. Tell me about the RAP Act.
Does everybody know what the RAP Act is? It's a bit of legislation. Right now, you're finding hip hop artists are making music if something comes into question for a prosecutor and there happens to be a trial, prosecutors are using lyrics from songs as evidence in court. And most of the time, and I don't know about most of the time, but I would imagine all the time, these lyrics are imagination, creation, ways for people to express themselves, maybe feelings that they've had, maybe stories that they've experienced, or people that they've seen. But quite often in hip-hop music, people are talking about things that are being used now in court. So there is an act that we are pushing hard to make sure it gets enacted into law, starting in California and in New York, by Representative Johnson, who's introduced the bill to prevent courts from being able to use creative works of expression as evidence in a court of law. And you can imagine, even if you're a journalist or if you're someone writing something, the idea is to let music and creativity come out and be natural. And it's, as I said, it comes from the heart, comes from the depths of your experience in life and feelings. Writers are crazy people. We're all crazy. We write about what we feel and what's going on in our lives. And to be able to express yourself, you can't have barriers. You can't have friction. And for the legal system to be looking at artists and saying, oh, that person said this in a lyric, it's going to totally change the mindset and the dynamic around creatives. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think any of us would believe in that or support that. So that's what we're fighting for.
Yeah. Another big change that you did was expand the number of nominations in the major categories. And that was a kind of shocking change in the music industry. It kind of came down last minute. Looking back on it, and this was just last year's ceremony, how do you feel about it? Are you going to, is that a permanent change?
I feel really good about it. It was very last minute. And that's the thing about the Academy. We are not going to sit and debate things for 4 years or 10 years or 2 years. When something needs to be changed, we're going to change it. We want to be very inclusive. We want to bring people together around music. We don't want to be isolating. We want to include all the different genres, and the opportunity to expand from 8 to 10 gave us the ability to honor more music. And I don't know anybody who can be mad about honoring more music instead of less. So it was a decision we made together as a group, as a staff, as a board, and we were really pleased with it. We'll watch how it goes over the next 2 years, but as I said, if members think it's too many or it's too few, it'll get changed through a proposal.
Well, it seems like a kind of thing that would arise in an era like right now where we have so much music coming out. Do you find, is your job just like bigger than it was for previous generations of Recording Academy presidents or CEOs?
I don't know if it's bigger. I think music has always been a big part of our culture. I think right now, to your point, we are seeing so much music. It's an explosion of creativity. Do you know how many songs are released every day?
Too many to listen to. I know that. That's all I know.
Any guesses how many songs are released in a day? 2,000, 3,000, no, 70,000 songs a day. New songs every day. So new music comes out on Friday, but you divide it by 7, and that's the number. So it's a lot of darn songs. So I do believe there's more music being consumed than ever before. I know there's more music being created than ever before. A lot of that's because of technology, other things like the streaming platforms and the ability to get your music out a lot easier. So I don't know if my job's any tougher. It's a lot of fun, and I think we're in a position to do a lot of really good work. As I said, music to me is the purest form of expression, and I think it has a magical power to it. So I'm really proud of the work the Academy's doing, and I'm happy to be able to be in service of great music people.
Yeah. Do you hold out hope that you might get a Drake or The Weeknd to come back to the ceremony after they've kind of sat it out for a few years?
Absolutely. I hold out hope on all things. That's my personality. But
like, what would it take?
I'm constantly talking to artists. I talk to artists every day. I go to 2 or 3 shows a week. First of all, I love music. I love shows, but I also want to spread our message. I want artists to know how much we value them. I want them to know how important they are to our society and to our, the culture. So I think it takes more education, more understanding, more awareness of what we do, the bigger picture, zooming out from just the trophies, from just the stage. And those are stories that I tell and people that I talk to all the time, and I'm doing it full time. So my hope is that, I want to be a home for every person, big, small, new artist, superstar, every genre. I want them to feel like the Academy is a place for them because we are only here to serve them.
Yeah. Well, I think that's our time. Thank you so much. I know. We'll keep talking to backstage. And, well, we have to have room for the performance, too.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah, your choreo.
And you'll come to the Grammys this year, and you'll see for yourself how amazing it is.
Fine. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Harvey.
Thanks, everybody.
Now for a session produced by our underwriter, CTIA. Here to explore 5G's impact, please welcome Meredith Atwell-Baker, CEO of CTIA, with Nicholas Thompson, CEO of The Atlantic.
All right. It's my great pleasure to be here. I love your title. You have 7 letters. You have 4 vowels. For Scrabble fans, it's everything except for the U. CEO of CTIA is very cool. 5G. So where are we in the deployment, and when will we even get 3G in this room so people can tweet nice pictures of us?
Great question. And first of all, I'm so happy to be here. I was almost as excited to meet Nick as I am about 5G. Incredible person, amazing resume. So 5G, let me take a step back and tell you that 2G was voice, 3G was data, 4G was video and media, and 5G is what's coming now. We're in about the second year of 5G. Most of these Gs are about a decade. I'm starting to travel the country and seeing really great innovations and innovators using the networks that are being built out. So we're in the very beginning. We've got a ways to go, but we're starting to really see what 5G is going to do.
And what has most surprised you so far as we've rolled it out?
I would say the first killer app of 5G is probably 5G home broadband.
Mm-hmm.
It's in 70 million homes right now. In the next few years, it'll be in hundreds of millions of homes. It can connect the unconnected where cable can't reach and the underserved, and because it's cheaper, and it's just as fast as cable. These 5G speeds are 100 times faster. They're about 100 times more data, and it's in real time.
And how does it work?
So it's new spectrum. It's mostly in the mid-band spectrum. So it's real time. So when we've talked about, autonomous surgery for a long time, or autonomous cars and remote surgery, all of these things can actually happen with 5G. So what I'm starting to see is how much it's going to transform our lives, whether it is transportation or health or education.
So it is true that if I had a good autonomous car, I wouldn't necessarily need the autonomous surgery because I could just get in the car and get to the doctor.
Okay, that's such an interesting, because I was just at a carrier's office, and in their innovation center, they have this pod, this wireless pod that autonomously drives to your driveway, and it connects you to your doctor, and you jump in there, and it takes all your tests and sends it to your doctor and does all those things that you probably don't mind going to the doctor because you're so fit. I hate going to the doctor. Mm-hmm.
Hey, hold on. I know we're slightly off script here. What does this pod look like, and what do you do when you get in it?
It's like one of those little things one of those little RVs you take camping for the weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got a little table in it. It's got screens, and it's got a mirror that takes all of your body temperatures and all that sort of stuff that you need.
Cool. Well, we'll get some out there on the wharf for anybody who starts suffering from heat stroke, because it's been hot. All right, so the most interesting use so far is people wiring up their houses, but what we've seen in 3G and what we saw in 4G is that it actually creates whole new industries. It creates, Uber. Uber wouldn't have existed without 4G. So what's going to come with 5G? Like, what is an industry that we don't have, that people are struggling with, and it's finally going to work once we have this?
Well, to some extent, we still don't know. But I will say
that you should know more than we do.
We have a foundation that does kind of a Shark Tank for entrepreneurs, and we had the event last week. It's called Catalyst. Our winner was this amazing woman who's a Title I school teacher. She's from D.C., but she taught in Virginia, and she had no budget for field trips. So, of course, she wanted to bring her kids to come see the monuments. She couldn't, so she was like, okay, well, what if we use AR? Well, Wi-Fi couldn't do it. So when 5G rolled out, she's now got this company called Kai XR. That's her name, Kai. And she is now bringing not only the monuments to kids, but she's bringing the world. She's got Egypt, she's got underground sea cables and fish, she's got NASA and the moon. It's really interesting because she's bringing the world to kids. And, frankly, I have kids, you have kids. That's how all kids should learn anyway.
So do you think that one of the killer apps of 5G will be augmented reality?
Oh, absolutely. Augmented virtual reality, for sure.
Okay, great. I'm excited for AR. In fact, I'm more excited for AR than VR, but we can leave that for another conversation. You also feel that 5G will be helpful on climate change. Explain why.
So Accenture said that 20% of our climate goals can be met by the innovation of 5G. And so I kind of pushed, and I said, well, what does that mean? And the answer was, well, that's like taking 72 million cars, the emission of 72 million cars off the road. Again, what's 72 million cars? Because on a Wednesday here in DC, I feel like that may be how many cars are in the road as I try to get here to work. That is more than the number of cars that were made and sold globally last year. That's a lot of cars.
It's a lot of cars, but how does 5G reduce emissions to equal the amount of cars taken off the road?
All right, so our convention's in Vegas next week. There's this company called Halo. It's run by a guy named Anand. They driverlessly bring you your rental car. In Vegas, it's running right now. And so if you want your convertible for the weekend, if you want to stay in Vegas, which I don't, but if you want your convertible for the weekend and go see the Hoover Dam, then like your convertible drives up to you and you can get in it and go to the Hoover Dam. So you can think about where that's going to go. That's just the beginning of what our driverless car situation is going to look like.
So 5G is helping us move to a driverless future, a more efficient future. That's going to end up making our roadways more efficient. It's going to make cars more efficient. What else will 5G do for climate change or for combating the climate crisis?
Think about agriculture. There are soil sensors so that you're not watering when you're not supposed to. You can put, I think I might have read that DC actually started with smart trash cans. Sounds silly, but how many garbage trucks drove by and pick up trash from trash cans that aren't full? So they can tell when the trash cans are full and when they're not. You know where to go.
Huh. The way you tell in New York is they're overflowing and there's crap piled up all over the sidewalk, and that's usually the case. I feel that way
about P Street too, but
the other thing, I guess, is that if augmented reality works, you probably don't need us on stage. And I ate a couple granola bars down in the green room, and that probably costs a lot of energy. You also believe that 5G could have benefits for inflation. Explain that.
So. Inflation is what, 7 to 9% now? If you go to the grocery store, you think it's more like 25%. I have an electric car, but I hear gas shock's pretty bad. The two outliers, this is really interesting, are smartphones and wireless data plans. They have year over year decreased. They have, over the last 10 years, they've been cut in half.
And it's not because we use them less.
Right, it's more data and faster speeds, and it costs less.
But is that 5G specific, or is that the tech industry in general?
That's the competition. That's what the competition of the American market has brought to customers here in America.
So tell me the most exciting thing for 5G that most of the folks in this room and watching on these screens will feel. What's the next thing where they're going to feel like, as opposed to just like, oh my gosh, I can, download trash off the internet quicker. Yeah.
It's you. I watched you actually on 5G today.
Did you? Did you watch me at like high speed so I talk even faster than normal?
I watched your Davos interviews. They were really good.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that.
It's a hard question to answer only because I think it's going to be so transformative that it's going to change every part of our life. 4G was, as you mentioned, very transformative with Uber and the whole sharing economy. In 5G, it's every part. It's transportation, it's education, it's health, it's our economy. So it's really important that we get this right and we remain the leaders in the world of the wireless industry.
What is the most? We have 30 seconds or 18 seconds left, but in 5G we'll double it. 34. What is the most important legislative step that has to happen now?
More mid-band spectrum. The government has 2/3 of mid-band spectrum. That's where the entire world is rolling out 5G, so we need more spectrum to keep up with them.
Awesome. Right on time. Perfect. Thank you so much, Meredith. That was a great pleasure to talk with you.
And now for a peek inside the Atlantic's immersive art show, A Forest for the Trees. Please welcome the creator, director, and visionary artist, Glenn Kaino.
Hi, everybody. My name is Glenn Kaino, and I'm fortunate enough to be in collaboration with the Atlantic magazine. I'm going to talk about our collaboration, but first, I thought I'd show a few works for context. So this piece actually starts out as an all-white American flag. and I tie-dye it using a recreation of a Confederate-era tarring solution. And in full explanation, it's made for waterproofing, but it's a close cousin to some of the more other implications. Anyone here know of the warning, you're not supposed to put an oily rag in a bucket, otherwise it will light itself on fire? It creates what's called an exothermic reaction. We do that on purpose in the studio. I tie-dye the flag, and I leave it in the corner of the studio, and after 2.5 to 3 hours, the flags light themselves on fire. And my artistic gesture is putting the fire out, because we know there's a whole contested history of flag burning, but not much of flag fire extinguishing. And when we show it into the museum space, we show it, you see the dark spots are the tar, the tan spots are the singe marks, but under the right lighting condition, it casts the pristine shadow of the flag on the wall. And I like to start my talks with this just to as a marker of the moment. Despite the charred exterior that we are living within, there sometimes are a value system that we hold dear in our heart. This is actually a photo, not my artwork. This is a photo of Tommy Smith, John Carlos, and Peter Norman in the 1968 Olympic Games. I've been fortunate enough to be a collaborator of Tommy Smith for about 10 years. And it all started with me making a cast of his arm and engaging a long-term process with him. And the first thing we made was this, which is a large-scale sculpture made out of 200 of Tommy Smith's arm. Each of those is one of Tommy's arms. And I'm proud and very happy to say that has just been acquired by the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So it's coming here to DC for a permanent installation in future. And our work together, thank you, and our work together has been documented in an Emmy-nominated film that I co-directed that included a lot of Atlantic journalists, including Jamel Hill, Lonnie Bunch, Congressman John Lewis before he passed, and whatnot. And so it's been a very, very exciting project for us to be on. But what brings me here to the stage today is a forest for the trees. And it all got started when I got a call from Brad Gerson. I know Brad's here somewhere. So Brad Gerson, the head of Atlantic Ventures, who called me up and told me about a series of journalism being commissioned about climate change called the Atlantic Wilderness Project under the leadership of Ross Anderson, who hopefully is also here. And one of the articles that was the most inspiring to me was from a fellow named David Truer, which argued to return the national parks back to the tribes. And I was very inspired by that. But before I work on any project, for me, I really intend on creating ethical systems of collaboration, not just for the output, but for actually the teams that are making the projects. So I began a collaboration with a woman named Lonnie Keepseagle, who was from Standing Rock Reservation. Her project before this project was actually the No Dabble protest at Standing Rock. And soon thereafter, we were connected with a tribe called the Kaduk tribe in Northern California, who were the premier fire stewards of the world. And when we started engaging with them, the idea that we were confronted with immediately, which I think is one of the more significant ones that we learned from, was the concept of what's called knowledge sovereignty, which is any of the traditional ecological knowledge that we might have been taught or learned stayed within the living members of the tribe, that we were not trading them with the outside world. And one of the things, I've also done a lot of work with art and magic, and one of the things that we say in the world of magic is that a secret has two faces. The knowledge that the secret exists on one hand, but the secret knowledge itself on the other. And while, in a magic show, we never tell you the secrets, but we certainly tell that they're secrets that exist. And so I said to the tribe, it would be great for us to not expose any of the real knowledge, but we want to tell the world that you're magic. And so with the support of the Atlantic, we built a 27,000 square foot forest in the middle of downtown LA. And here's a little teaser.
It's time for us to bring good fire back to the land. For the last 100 years, we have abused our landscape at the demand of industry. Our rivers are unhealthy and our forests are burning at a greater extent than ever before known. We know that fire can be good. We know that fire is vital to preserving our forest and our rivers. We can help save them and our future. And it all starts with learning from the magical stories of our past. So we've spent the last year with a team of artists, musicians, and tribal leaders building a forest of illusions to help bring this story to life. And it's all hidden in a warehouse in downtown Los Angeles. It's a forest for good fire, for the water, for the fish, for the wildlife. It's a forest for life, for all of us. So come join us at A Forest for the Trees.
So in the forest, there's a lot of, thank you, engaging illusions. There's animatronic robots that we use as interfaces so we can talk to the trees. There's stories and told from and about the Great Basin bristlecone pine, some of the oldest trees in the world. And the finale piece actually was also inspired by a magic trick. There's a magic trick where a magician tears a newspaper into tiny little pieces and puts it back together again. Has anyone seen this? A few people have seen this trick. So a magician tears a newspaper and then it goes back to its original condition. It's very beautiful. And when we were making the show, a magician asked me, he said, what's your favorite trick? And I said, that's the one where you tear away the newspaper and you put it back together again. And he said, do you know why? I said, well, I'm a visual artist. I know why. Of course, it's very visual. And he said, that's not why you like it. He was a mentalist, And I said, well, you're a mentalist. Tell me why I liked it. And he says, do you even know what that's about? And I said, no, tell me. And he says, that piece is about resurrection. That piece is about hope. That piece is about the stubborn belief that even if you see something destroyed in front of your eyes, that there's a chance for it to be rebuilt into its pristine condition. And he said, and that's who you are. And I said, thank you, that's indeed who I am, but that's who I think we all are. I just get a chance to express it, through art once in a while. So what we're doing in downtown LA is we're at the end of the show, we resurrect this historic tree. It's the Olivera Street fig, using what we're saying, new technologies and ancient stories to chart a path for a hopeful future. So thank you very much. It's open till February. If you're in LA, please let us know and come by and see it. So thank you. Yeah.
Please welcome to the stage neoclassical pianist and composer Black Bach, performing an original song, George Floyd and the Struggle for Equality. to the stage the Atlantic's Candace Montgomery.
And that's a wrap on the first day of the Atlantic Festival, the Idea Stage. Thank you to all of our speakers for joining us today. If you enjoyed what you saw and want to see more of the Atlantic, you can become a subscriber. Please visit theatlantic.com for more information on how to do that. If you are already a subscriber, we thank you. The festival action doesn't stop here. Stay with me for a moment for a quick download of what's in store. At 5:30, those of you over 21 are invited to join us for happy hour on the pier. All week we'll be serving a specialty cocktail paired with an article from our archives. At 8 p.m. we are proud to be premiering Shadowland, a new docuseries streaming on Peacock, based on the Atlantic's critically acclaimed reporting project that goes deep into the impact conspiracy theories have on our democracy. And we have so much more for you in store over the next 2 days. Tomorrow, Ideas Stage kicks off at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. You can check out our full festival schedule online or through the Hopin app. Thanks again for joining us, and I'll see you all on the pier.